And Utku thinks everything I do is too controversial. So I'm just basically going to talk about run-of-the-mill things you should do around the elbow. And I think that'll work out in the end. No disclosures. I found the elbow when I started my practice very humbling. And maybe because when I trained, we didn't use the CT a lot. And we just kind of talked about two ligaments and a hinge joint. And that's not the elbow. The elbow is actually a complex anatomical kind of construct that demands that you think about it and figure out where everything goes. And it's pretty unforgiving, and you'll see that in your outcomes if you're not on top of it. And that's what I found when I first started, is the understanding had to come first. So thinking about it, talking with people in your practice about that fracture that looks hard is probably the best way to go. I learned early on that the fat pad actually is important. We saw a lot of them as a resident, but then as a staff, you could figure out things were going on simply from an X-ray, and it's not always a CT that you need. You should always check the radiocapitellar line pre and post-op. A sagging pre-op means the LCL's out. Sagging or high post-op means your ulna is not fixed correctly. So you got to think about what you do before you do it and after you do it. And there's many lines you can check. I think if you do an elbow series, you can check things that you can see maybe on the CT, but you'll know before you get the CT what's going on. Mason classification I found over the years was useless. You found out that we had this kind of dogmatic approach. If you had a Mason 3, you're replacing it. At Mason 1, you're fixing it. I think if you have up to 3 pieces, you can probably fix it. The plates don't work in my hands. I try to avoid putting a plate on. I know you can find the safe zone. I can put it in the safe zone, but then the elbow is often stiffer afterwards. So I'll try to fix with screws, headless screws, and if we can't do that, I'll replace it. And I think you miss that. And I think the Essex Lopresti injury is rare. I see very few of them, but it's overwhelming. If you miss it, the complications are bad. So you should have it in the back of your mind at all times. And you should always test the interosseous membrane and the drudge, especially when you're operating around the radial head, before closing. Now, I don't often close all the way. I'll use sharp snaps to close the lateral side of the elbow and then test it and x-ray it. You don't have to redo your closure 3 times as you're figuring out what's going on. The terrible triad is no longer terrible. If you think about it correctly, it's actually a fairly good injury because we get fairly good range of motion, almost normal range of motion if you treat it appropriately in the appropriate timing in the appropriate way. The terrible triads, posterior elbow dislocation, radial head, coronoid fracture. There's systematic approaches have been published. I think Greg Dell'Orca has a great one that was in JBJS a few years ago, and just about how you do that. You look at the radial head, then you look at the coronoid, and then you look at the LCL and MCL if needed. MCLs very rarely need to be fixed, but it can be. I think my secret is in the coronoid. I very rarely, in a terrible triad, fix the coronoid if it's a small piece. I just take the piece off. Put a fiber wire, 2 fiber wire sutures through it, use a microvector ACL guide, and bring it out through the back of the ulna. Fiddling around and trying to fix the coronoid and not being sure whether it's stable enough is wrong. You want early range of motion for a terrible triad. And the best way to do that is with a capsule pull down and tightening. There's literature to prove that. I think when you get in the OR and you're finished fixing, you think you've got it right, you should have this. You should have a stable reduction extension, at least probably 30 degrees, not 45 degrees like in literature. It should be stable in pronation and supination, and should be stable against valgus stress. If you have those, and you get early range of motion, you can have a good outcome. I think everyone's thoughts were to fix the coronoid no matter what, even the small fragment, because the terrible triad doesn't matter how big the piece is. Well, it doesn't matter how big the piece is. It's been shown in the literature that if you have a coronoid fracture, but you have these four factors, you don't need to fix the coronoid. The coronoid looks great to fix with the little screw from the ulna into the coronoid. It's not that easy to do. Even on a type 2, you think, oh, I can get that. You can get it, but it's often an empty piece of bone, and it's hard to get get it to fix down. And if you're sitting around waiting for that to heal while you're restricting range of motion, it's not doing your patient any favors. So I don't do that. Terrible tetrad is another constellation of injuries, which is a triad plus an olecranon fracture. It was sort of unrecognized. It's not really talked about a lot in the literature, but you'll see this in your practice. It's not a terrible triad. It's often associated with significant ligament injuries, MCL and LCL, and if you fix it and ignore the fact that you have that deficiency, and you fix the olecranon incorrectly, and you ignore the PUDA, then you're going to have trouble. And I'll talk about the PUDA in a minute, because it's one of the major things that we learned in my practice. I use the Curl classification when looking at the complex fractures. Anthony just showed that fracture that is overwhelming, the amount of things that are going on in it. So if you think about it, you just think about the coronoid, the ulna, the radial head, and the ligaments, and you figure out whether they're intact, simple, or complex. You can figure out how to go about approaching this. Otherwise, it's just a big bag of bones that kind of makes you panic. And you really just want to concentrate on these 4 things and getting these right before you come out of the OR. The ligaments are impossible to assess before the OR, especially with that tetrad. You'll often have a joint that looks reduced, and when you fix it, it's out of joint, and it's because ligaments are out. Coronoid fractures have been discussed here, but they were the bugaboo for me. I really didn't know how to fix those when I started practice. Didn't know how to appreciate what was going on. There's many different classifications. Basically, there's tiny, big, and large fractures, and what to do with them. I think that the point was already been made in the last talk, the type 1 or type 2 coronoid fracture in the right context is not trivial because of the medial side. The medial side is very important, and you have to have an approach in your head about why that medial side is important. You can have a torn LCL, like the terrible triad, like fracture radial head and coronoid off, and that's a constellation we agree on, but you can have a silent medial-sided fracture with a LCL tear. The radial head looks okay. It might gap the joint a little bit that side, but it's crushed the medial side. You can't see it on a lateral x-ray. And sometimes it's obscured on the AP x-ray. It doesn't come all the way over. So this is one you have to have a high suspicion that this is going on if you see lateral gapping on the elbow. And it's one I missed when I started. I'll just talk about the PUDA because we wrote about this few years ago. It was an ongoing project by Dominic Rouleau, actually, who's at a hospital across town from us. There's 2 trauma ones in our city. And it's about the proximal angle in the ulna. If you don't reduce that and don't recognize it, you will have significant decrease in range of motion. Some of the newer plates that have come out recognize it, and there is an accommodation for the PUDA, so you don't have to bend it to match. But that angle at the beginning will affect your radiocapitellar line. We all know about the inherent varus valgus inclination of the proximal ulna, but this is about at the joint in the 90-degree plane. It's easy to read about. We've written about it a few times. The other thing about the olecranon that's not simple is hardware. Over the years, I just realized that I hate taking hardware out, and it's patients complain about it a lot of times. Almost 50% of people who have a tension band get hardware out, and even in plates. So for simple fractures now, I just do this. I do a fiber wire repair of the olecranon. So you just take a figure of 8 and a box. You do a modified Tajima stitch in the triceps tendon and bring it down and repair it, and you get early range of motion. It's actually a good way to do it, and I never complain about their hardware. Elbow dislocations, what have I learned over my career? That they're simple and not so simple, and it's hard to determine which ones they are until you've actually gone in and reduced them. Dr. McKee, who's in the audience, has written extensively about this, and he should be giving this talk. But basically, a complex dislocation is one that doesn't become concentric when you reduce it. If you can, however, get a lateral x-ray with the patient on their back with forward flexion, no abduction, and it reduces, then they can be treated non-operatively. And that's been shown extensively. Andrew Duckworth wrote about that, and I think Mike was on the paper. Do you put an external fixator on? When I started, I used to do this, dynamic external fixators. They've sort of died because of the complications, and also that you have to drill a hole right through your repair site. If you have to go back, you've emptied out your repair site, so it's hard to do. Do you use hinged internal fixation? We don't have it in my hospital. I've tried to get it. Probably there's 1 or 2 cases a year as an elbow surgeon that I would like to have it, but we've got away with it in the meantime. So maybe open repair is not such a bad thing in the end. I think that if you think about how long do I have to immobilize these patients, I've learned over the years that my immobilization for everything's coming down. So for distal radius fractures, it's only 2 weeks now. For elbows, it's early range of motion. So I don't stop in the OR till I have range of motion that's stable, and once I get that, I stop operating and I let them move right afterwards. But if you have to, they will tolerate 2 weeks of transfixion pinning, even up to 4 weeks in some studies. So if you have to, you have to. So stiffness is really the enemy after elbow case. We've looked at that. There's probably a genetic predisposition to this. There's other things going on with mast cells and other inflammatory reactions that cause cross-reaction with some genetic marker. We haven't figured it out yet. My approach is you just start early range of motion, and that seems to work better, but so you'll still get stiffness in some patients, and you should warn them about it. Do you use NSAIDs or radiation for stiffness or HO? I don't. If I go back for a first release, I use NSAIDs. I very rarely use radiation anymore. When I started, I used it. I just don't use it anymore. I operate when range of motion is really limited. You can see HO occurring, but people still have range of motion. I will let that mature in like 4 or 6 months. When they lose their range of motion, you have to operate quickly because the joint starts to be affected, at least in my experience. Splinting versus early motion protocols. Like I said, you can transfix for 2 weeks, but I try to get early range of motion as fast as possible. Hinge braces after surgery, I used to use them all the time. Now I don't use them. I find they make some more complications than you want. Patients often have them on wrong, down in a non-isometric point, and it's not good for the elbow. I just learned yesterday you could use Botox for release. So there, I've learned something new. Dr. Rosenwasser uses it for in the brachialis and the biceps. After release has good results. And I will try that because stiffness is a bad thing, at least in my practice. You can learn from your complications. That's one of the things I've learned is that you look at the complication, you figure out what you did in the OR, you figure out what you did post-op, and change things. So they're a very good teacher if you're honest. So the top 10 take-home tips from my practice are you really need to know the anatomy. You need to discuss it with your partners and discuss with other elbow surgeons or people interested in that if you really want to figure out what's going on. CT scan all complex fractures. It's just too much going on to not have advanced imaging. Fix the coronoid or tighten the capsule, almost always. I will almost always tighten the capsule rather than fixing the coronoid. But you can fix the coronoid if it's big enough. Remember, test the interosseous memory and drudge when you do any radial head work. You should have a systematic approach to the cerebral triad and tetrad. I kind of went through it. It's in the literature. Don't make something up. That what's in the literature works. The ulna olecranon fracture might look simple, but it's not a slam dunk. Make sure you get the PUTA reestablished. Watch your nerves. I don't put any loops around any nerves when I operate. So if I take the ulnar nerve out, I just know where the ulnar nerve is. I don't put a loop on it because I'll look up and I'll find the residents retracting or surfing on the nerve. And that's always when you have complications. It's a high CRPS risk. So I don't do anything with my nerves. I leave them where they are. In pediatrics, you get a comparison view or arthrogram. We haven't talked a lot about pediatrics. You should have a backup plan. Whenever you go in and you say, okay, it's like chosen pessimism. What could go wrong with the elbow today? So if this goes wrong, I should have this backup plan. So it should be available. And I think complications are all data, and you should review them honestly and change your practice. Thank you.